all of the computers should be muted, and then the mic that's in front of you is running here. So
Okay.
so close. And let's just check. Joao.
We have sound. Okay.
Can you test? Chi and Marian, can you hear Joao?
Sound is okay.
Can you speak?
1, 2, 3, 4. Sound, test.
No, I cannot hear. Very quiet.
Yeah, you gotta get right up in there.
Let's move it closer.
You mean the mic?
Yeah, move the mic closer.
Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4. Can you hear? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Can you hear me?
So quiet.
Quiet. Technical parts. Anything you can do about this? Quiet, soft, quiet. Now getting
Oh, better. Yes.
better now.
Yes. Sounds good.
All right.
Thank you.
I think we are good on the tech. Thank you, all the tech folks. Yeah.
Check 1, 2.
Great.
That sounds good.
The Zoom participants are very loud.
Adam, when we're not speaking, do you want us to stay muted, to like mute and unmute?
Hang on 1 second. Can we bring the Zoom participants down a little bit?
Yeah, they did.
Okay. Can you say that again, Mary?
When we're not speaking, do you want us to mute and unmute?
I don't think it's a problem. I think it's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Just to get a sense, I'll turn it on so you can see what it looks like here. Haha. Really good, actually. So we're working on video cutout stuff. Thanks for coming. To all of you here, as well as people joining on the live stream. I'm Adam Vidixis. I'm the president of SPLICE Music. We're coming to you from SPLICE Institute at Western Michigan University here in Kalamazoo. So those of you that are streaming in, welcome. Those of you here, of course, great to have you. So we have a really awesome panel. Our topic today is electroacoustic music and the visual medium. And we're really looking at that term, the visual medium, in the broadest terms possible. So really all of the different visual elements that can go along with this, that go along with music, and in particular electronic and electroacoustic music. We're joined today by a really fantastic panel. Joining us remotely, we have Chi Wong, Marian Ramirez, and then here in person we have Eli Stein, as well as one of our featured guest artists this week, Joao Pedro Oliveira. So please join me in welcoming them. Thanks. So I'm going to start off with a prompt, and we're going to just sort of see. I'd love to have an open discussion, so feel free, panelists, to please jump in and kind of just have a conversation. You don't have to sort of wait for anything, and we'll see where things go. Also, hopefully, when we get to the end, we'll have some time for audience questions. So if you do have a question or a comment on something that comes up, please do just make a note of it and save it for the end, and then we'll be able to do that so we can get you to be heard on Zoom as well. All right, so we're going to start off with an opportunity for you to let us all know a little bit about what you do, but also to kind of talk about, for each of you, your work incorporates visual media, whether it's dance or video and any of these other things, and electronic or electroacoustic music in really compelling ways. So can you talk about what you do and your approach to these elements in your own artistic practice? So why don't we start with Chi, please?
Yes, really honored to be here. Oops. Thank you so much for inviting me. So glad to be here. My name is Chi Wong. I'm currently a faculty at Indiana University at Center for Electronic and Computer Music. And the research and composition, the type of composition I'm doing mostly is based on data-driven instrument. It's a specific type of electroacoustic music realization and composition type, which involve a large amount of it will be fabricate your own instrument system, which include something that you can control with or live control with, and then you can compose with it and do your composition, and most of my composition will require live performance. So data-driven instrument performance is what I'm mostly interested in doing, and my research is based on that. So when I received the prompt about visual media, for me, I think mostly it has to do with the production of how to get a good recording of the live performance, and how will that be presented as a composition and also performance. And when I do my composition, I also think about how I can bring that element into the real performance. So that's also incorporated in the compositional process. So I'll start with that.
Great, thank you very much. And let's turn it over to Marian.
Hi, thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel. I am a choreographer and a dancer. I am dance faculty currently at Denison University in Ohio. And for many years I was teaching at Temple University in Philadelphia, where I overlapped with Adam, and we had an opportunity to do a project together in 2019. My choreographic work really focuses on doing somatic research, where dancers, where as a choreographer and with the dancers, we go into kind of body sensations and their kind of embodied experiences to devise the movement material and decide on the elements that will take part of the performance being visual projections, sounds, objects, and from there, then we create together. We work a lot in collaboration when I work with musicians, composers, visual artists, and the dancers. And what I'm really interested in is how to bring these human experiences into these other elements. And the times that I've worked with electronic music, how can this assist us in kind of magnifying experiences and sensations that we have, but kind of magnify them and help them help us create other worlds that are beyond our capacities on the everyday life. And that's something that both visually and with audio I've been able to experiment with, not to take us away from our body experience, but kind of transform it, magnify it, and create a new world for the audience to kind of sit with.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
And Eli.
Yeah, for sure. Hello, everybody. I'm Eli. I'm a visiting professor at Oberlin Conservatory, which is just down the road. And my work varies a lot in terms of its engagement with visual media. I've worked with dancers, I've worked with instrumentalists and ensembles to kind of create visuals for pieces that they have. I've also done sound design for film and virtual reality, which is a very different context, but one that, of course, is kind of tying the visual and the audio together. What else? I think for me, I came into video art and working with visuals because people are a lot more interested in electronic music when you have a visual, and that could be a hot take or a cold take, depending on how you feel about it, but I think in general, audiences get excited, the general audience gets excited when they can't see something visual along with something electronic. So that was kind of my path into it as an electronic musician.
Great, and I'd like to thank you for making the drive, Eli, to join us here in
For
person.
sure.
That's really
Yeah,
great. We really appreciate it. And last but not least, Joao.
Hello everybody, well, most of you already know me, I'm João Pedro Oliveira. I'm originally from Portugal, and since 3 years I am a professor at the University of California in Santa Barbara. And my path is probably a little bit different because I started working only with instruments, then I started composing also with electronics, and my interaction with the visual media just happened a few years ago, so it's more of a recent practice. Though as I studied, besides music, I also studied architecture, so I always had an interest in the relations with the visual arts and in general. And going into visuals was somehow the natural, although a little bit late step into my research interests. So I've been working with image, I've been working also with dance in several contexts. I worked also with visual artists, and most of my research has to do with the idea of integration of the different media into a single artwork. So that's what I'm pointing out usually when I do multimedia pieces or even just instrumental or mixed music pieces, how to integrate all the elements into some unity, which, as I said before, where the whole is bigger than the sum of the parts.
Thanks. So I'll start off our first sort of conversational prompt here, and like I said, please feel free to meander and wander and take us where the conversation goes. But I think I'd like to bring us to the somewhat unique aspect of electronic and electroacoustic music practice, which is that in electroacoustic music, performance gesture and sound production can become unlinked or confounded in ways that are particularly unique to this musical practice because of the use of automation technologies. So there's already an inherent interaction and perhaps sometimes even disconnect of oral and visual elements even in performance. So does this aspect of what electronic and electroacoustic music can bring to your work, does that have a role? Is that something that you're considering? when you're drawn to using electroacoustic music, particularly with regard to other visual elements coming into play, and if so, how? Or if not, obviously let us know that too. So does anyone want to take that to start? Okay, then I will throw it to Eli.
Oh, wow, okay.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's a really intriguing question, because a lot of the time when you're working with instrumentalists, even if they aren't electroacoustic, you still have to manage time and manage working with visuals in different ways. But specifically, you're interested in like the disconnect between visual and sonic. Yeah. I'd have to look at my catalog of work to think more about that. But I think for me, that disconnect is less interesting than maybe what John was saying, which is just kind of thinking about two things coming together, whether that's dance or audio or an extended instrument and visuals, making something larger than themselves. And maybe that would incorporate a disconnect, but I think at the same time, that's more like an added value of electroacoustic music is this ability to disconnect motion, gesture, and sound. So for me, it's less a focus. Whereas I think with Che, I'd be really interested to hear what she says, just because a lot of her work involves performance with instruments too. So maybe I'll throw it to her.
Thank you. I think in my particular case, it's a little bit different, because a lot of my composition, I'm the composer and also the performer, and I also part of my job is also to bring those parts together, including the controllers, the algorithm, programming, composition, and performance. So in this case, in a lot of my composition, I'm doing all three roles. So I would say that it's quite helpful to know everything, all three roles. So I understand as the instrument builder, what's the real, what do I intend to do when I'm fabricating my own controllers? What sensor do I start with? How do I put it together? What kind of performative gesture or actions I'm having in mind? What do I want my audience to see while I'm performing with this controller? It doesn't have to be very specific, but I ask myself those questions when I start this project. And along the way, through the creative process, even with the sound design, what kind of sound material that I'm working with, and how do I make it expressive, even if at the stage of creating the sound, synthesized or captured or sampled and modified, and how do I make it interactive, is for better or worse way of saying that, but also being able to really find that connection. That's what I see as opportunities to make new musical expression. So that's always one really important thing that I strive to do in my composition. And also, I think this question is really fascinating because it involves the sound design or composition and also the visual media. Those are like two different domains, but also humans are essentially multimodal creatures. So we would love to see multiple, aspects of things to confirm each other, or to sum together, like Charles said, sum together and bring it into a new level of virtuoso performance, and also as an art piece. So I think I see this more as an opportunity, and when I see it, I have opportunity to bring it into life. Even if I construct a expressive section or phrase, a sound, I usually just follow my instinct or follow this good model or section and see how that will take me to for a specific piece of composition and performance. Yes.
Can I follow that?
Of course, yes, please.
So this disconnect or connection with the visual gestures and the music and the sounds, I want to just kind of talk about a few examples. One of them is this idea that kind of the choreography and the compositions can really magnify a human experience, and as you say, kind of going to new levels of virtuosity that she was sharing. There was one piece in which I had a small kitchen on stage, and people were cooking while the performance was happening and the dance was happening at the same time. So it was multi-sensory. We had like the smells of the garlic in the audience while we're hearing the spoon kind of making sounds in the pots as the dancing is happening, and that juxtaposed with each other was kind of saying something. And then at some point we magnified that by like the composer was on stage live. All of a sudden loads of pots and pans appeared, and then he started to play like a music composition with all the pots and pans. So like the element that was on stage kind of just got magnified, almost like we fell into a rabbit hole, and whatever we were feeling or smelling just kind of both visually and what we could hear just kind of exploded, and it was all supporting each other, and then the dance kind of was exploding with it. And but that was all together. Also there was a mic that was picking up the sounds of the food frying, and then that was as is. We were not working with electroacoustic people at that point, so we had things as they were. The gestures were right there in front of you; you could see them, and they got magnified as the piece was developing. And then to contrast that, another piece that I did with Adam, one example is I started the piece on stage under a very small pool of light, lying down with.
She's got props.
With this egg that is made of glass and has water inside. So when the light hits it, kind of like there's this kind of projection on whichever wall surface that is kind of water moving. And it's a big glass, and when it's lit, you notice it's glass and it's delicate and it's over a human body that is laying down. So there's something very precarious about it that I'm caring for. And it's evocative, of course, of egg, perhaps birth, perhaps mother, perhaps something like that. And Adam composed the sounds with glass, and you can correct us or add to it. So sounding of glass that was in the space through different speakers, and he made the sound travel through the theater, so you hear it here, hear it there, hear it there, hear it there, almost as if this contained experience of this glass that is very protected and is right here and is very small has kind of expanded into the space. So the visual gesture was contrasting what we were hearing, yet they were so interrelated and connected. And throughout the piece, he kept, at some other point, he played the glass, and we saw his gestures of playing the glass live. But in this part, it was a little bit more distorted in the sense that they were not going together, but then that was very evocative of seeing such an intimate experience, kind of traveling through space, and just kind of, you hear glass, and there's there's a fracture at the same time that you're observing a unity. So I don't know if that kind of gives some example of what we're talking about.
Yeah, that's a great contrast. Really great.
Well, my path is a little bit different because I was very experienced, I'd say, in electronic music when I started to relate it with other media. So the work I was doing was mostly with instruments or in acousmatic pieces. However, this idea that Adam talked about, connect and disconnect, is very pertinent. It's very important to understand because, in fact, in pure acousmatic music, so without any instruments, there is definitely some sort of disconnection between what the listener is perceiving in his own full body, with all his senses, and what is perceiving with his ears. So there is an experience of oral listening, which is not supported by any visual or any other type of sensorial experience. So that can be problematic in some ways. So one of the, if you can talk about historical aspects of acousmatic music, is precisely the criticisms and the reactions from many people saying that in fact it's music that is not, there is no presence, there is nothing, there is just the sound. Okay, so this is the aspect of this connection. However, the literature on this field also shows that no matter what human beings do to adapt to this connection, they will always try to find some sort of imaginary source for the sounds that they are listening. So that is described in the literature in many ways, but probably the most common is the source, what we call the source bounding. So if we're walking down the street with our eyes closed and we hear first a car passing by, we immediately make a connection of the sound and its source. This is this bonding between what we hear and what we anticipate that the source for that sound is. So this source bonding is extremely interesting because in the case of pure acousmatic music, pure electroacoustic music, if you're listening to something that is not iconic, that is abstract sound, it's not the sound of a bell or it's not the sound of a car, it's just an electronic sound. No matter what, we have the capacity, and that goes to our imagination, we have the capacity of connecting that to some sort of imaginary source. And that is what it makes the acousmatic experience extremely interesting, because we can have this kind of a trip where we are imagining all the sci-fi or horror or comic or whatever types of sources for the sounds that we are listening. Imaginary instruments, imaginary contexts, imaginary landscapes, etc. So that's one part of the problem, which is the disconnect and the attempt that humans make to reconnect to the sound. Now, when we go into the visuals, and all of us work with visuals, that's when we have somehow the kind of opportunity to reconnect in a more direct way. So it's not just leaving up to the imagination of the listener, but we are kind of, providing some food for that imagination. So, as a simple example, if we're working on a visual music piece where sounds and images interact in a certain way, the way we make them interact, the way we make the image go with the sound, or the dance movement go with the sound, or whatever we're using go with the sound, it's a kind of, it's again food for the listener and the viewer to go into new fields of imagination. So we're kind of projecting something that is already in the listener's mind, and now we're kind of trying to find out, is this what you were thinking? Is this what you were expecting? I don't know if I'm clear with this,
Yeah.
but it's like we're kind of projecting into the listener something that was already into the imagination of the listener.
So that's a really fantastic way to put that, Joao. Thank you. I appreciate it. It makes me think also then with regard to the attention of the viewer and the listener. You know, when we provide multiple medias, right, which is a kind of funny term. I think Sam was saying this multimedia is already a plural, and multi-plural, I don't know. But when we have multiples of these, there are some cases where we have to make decisions, or sometimes they don't. The artist does not make these decisions about where the attention is going to be, right? So this great example is, you know, if you have a performer and a video, whether that's a dancer in video or a musician in video, you know, where are you supposed to look? You know, so these can come up and they can be confusing. It's a challenge, and lots of people have written really and talked about this in really profound ways. But I'm wondering what all of your approaches to that are when you have multiple things, multi-sensory experiences. How are you managing what that expectation is that, you know, for the audience member?
That's a complicated question.
Yes.
I think, if I can go to, just very quickly, if I can continue on
Sure.
what I was saying, because probably it connects with this, it's somehow in a way that how we think that we are projecting something into the listener in a way. That is, we know that what we do as creators and what we anticipate that will be the result is very different from what each of the listeners will perceive it. So I think in my case, I try to find a way where, as I said before, the sum of parts is, the whole is larger, is bigger than the sum of parts. And also give somehow the freedom to the listener and the viewer to explore all the events that are happening in that moment. So perhaps sometimes listening to one piece by anybody is not enough. You probably have to listen and then start to look at the details of a certain part of the visuals, or start to look at or listen to the details of a certain part of the audio, or the dance movements, or something else. So this multi-sensorial experience needs also a multi-level of listening, where once is not enough. We have to do it twice, 3 times, 4 times to absorb everything that is inside the piece.
Great.
I had a pedagogical experience recently with a student whom I will not name, but it was a piece for.
Uh-oh.
Sorry, yeah, it sounds bad, but it was a really good example of like when you experience something that is audio and visual. There's all these different channels of kind of how you're thinking about expressivity and musical information or visual information. And this was a piece for soprano and percussion battery, so I think like tam-tam, bass drum, some auxiliary percussion, video above as well, and that all together seemed pretty fine, but the thing that was the stickler and which made it very overwhelming was that the video was a short film including the soprano, like doing other things, and so she was singing, but also represented above on the video, and to me it seemed like while I was watching it, my attention was just totally ripped, because watching a soprano sing is already really interesting visually. So having this kind of double icing on a cake, or like triple icing on a cake, kind of broke down any kind of coherency, really. And so it was an interesting example of a piece that maybe took people's attention and split it or overlaid in ways that weren't functional. And I guess they're still working on it, so I don't know what that outcome will be, if it will be to remove the video or keep it in or something else. But it was really cool to see, because, and especially for them, they felt like it was totally coherent and all made sense together. But as an outside listener and viewer, it was very overwhelming, because there were all these, in this case, 2 visual kind of channels or means of expressivity that overlapped and almost canceled each other out. So that was very interesting to think about this question. Schizo, yeah.
There's something interesting in choreography that I love playing with, which is the working with focus, composing with focus. So composing with where would we direct the attention, and I think this is what kind of we're all talking about, but purposefully create moments of overwhelm for the audience if that is what the piece needs to express. And finding ways in which to get there and come out of that, so that the composition of the overwhelm, of adding all the elements, similar to what Joao was talking about, like all of them together is saying something different. The details about each one at that point is not as important as what the whole is creating. And then there's space to then accumulate them and deaccumulate them, so that we can like take one and appreciate it for what it is. I often really love having many dancers on stage doing not extremely, but very different things simultaneously. And sometimes, you can take that in. You cannot even see one dancer. You can choose to look at one dancer and not the rest. They become kind of part of your peripheral vision. Or you just see them, the chaos. And after a while, because those bodies are next to each other, the chaos starts to be organized. There's something that unites them inside of those differences. And that becomes the thing that we're talking about. One particular example, this last year, as many artists have been doing, I've been doing choreographies based on the experience of social isolation and helping university students as part of it kind of digest and process some of the experiences they had, and finding kind of new expression and ways to reconciliate, where we're going and how we're healing from it. But, a lot of the feelings of overwhelm, we were able to bring them forward with adding, many elements. And with the idea of breathing becoming something so precarious during the pandemic, I work with some electronic musicians in recording a lot of different breathings from many dancers, like breathing while they're running, or breathing when they're dancing, or breathing when they're calm, and then using the breathing sounds to make a new composition where the timing is altered, the amount of voices that is at once is altered. Something similar to what Adam did a few years ago, to have something like at the back of the theater, and then we hear it at the front, so this is where is this coming from? And when they all accumulate together, plus the dancers are dancing, and you hear them, running, and they're breathing on stage too, so, where this breath, after a while, it really touches you, and you're overwhelmed with, breathing, what's that? And for 10 minutes or 15 minutes, that's all we're hearing. And it starts to resonate with the audience. And then all of a sudden, everything disappears and there's no breath. And then we land there. Oh, so many people stop breathing, actually. And we're just saying it with the gesture of overwhelming with the senses and the sounds and the visuals, and then all of a sudden having everything disappear. And then the thing starts to speak for itself. To kind of create this, kind of emotional landscapes that bring forward, something that people have experienced. Yeah, I don't know, that I really enjoy playing with, when we put the focus on how we, can go in small detail, or go, have the focus be everywhere, and, yeah.
I really love that idea too, that this is not just a sort of issue, but actually an opportunity. And I think you put it as composition of focus, which is just like a really fantastic way to put it. Something that Robin started with. And yeah, Chi, I was going to just say, this has to be something you already mentioned, but that you have to constantly think about it and what you're doing. So it's great that we'll have you kind of summarize this for us as you're constantly thinking about it, I'm sure.
I think Marian said the level of being able to realize the pattern and to be able to identify the focus and compose all the way to the focal point and then going away from it is extremely, it sounds like really related to virtuosity. So that you compose that pattern and you will be able to really see the pattern ahead of time and analyze it and identify it and be able to realize that's the focal point for the entire composition. And no matter you realize it as a collective of forces or you plan it out, moment to moment, it's this ability to really, see that ahead of time. That's really, excites us as general public and also for artists. So virtuosity really excites us. It really arouses us, right? It facilitates the experience of this emotional and meaningful journey in our minds and spirits. So yeah, I think that's really resonating with any type of performance. Yes. So yeah, in my practice, I'm just really speaking the tiny slice of the practice that I'm doing is whenever I'm developing or programming the algorithm that I'm trying to use in the composition. I'm always having this in mind that what I wanted the audience to see, what's my creative intention, and how am I going to really realize that. So that's all those questions that I ask ahead of time before I really know what the piece is about. So I think music technology really gave us this opportunity to explore new expressions from this new medium. That the fact is that we don't really know how it is. So I think we're really at the exploration period that we can't really say that we know much about it yet. So I think it's really fine to really kind of stand in the chaos and then experience it and then compose for this moment, for this year, and then see what happens. At the same time, I also see that because this, the type of instrument that I'm interested in doing is data-driven instrument, it's also a type of instrument. So all the things that, like traditionally trained me as a pianist is that we understand that how, it takes to bring a piece to life, to bring a piece to a real performance on stage. All the preparation and all how we connect from moments to moment and how we present it and how we're gonna get it to be appreciated and understood and observed is all the knowledge that we can bring into this new type of expression. Yes.
That's great. Yeah, that was as this was going through, I was like, oh, this is so wrapped up in everything that you're doing all the time in your work. So I have so many questions, but I think this would be a great point to open it up for some audience questions. So if you have a question, could you please just come up here so that we can have you speak into the microphone? Do we have questions from the audience? Sure, why don't you have your hands up first all the way in the back? Come on up. Cool.
Okay, can everyone hear me? So we talked a little bit about sometimes the listener looks for a source of a sound if they can't visually see it. I know sometimes one thing that I might struggle with is the ways in which pop culture will absorb a timbre or a sound or a visual concept And I'm wondering what you all see as your relationship to those kinds of sounds. Do you completely avoid, like the theremin automatically associates a lot of sounds or ideas for people? And do you see yourself trying to push back on those, completely avoiding them? What do you see as your relationship to those kinds of pop culture absorbed objects?
Great question.
What are the pop culture objects? Sorry, can you, that part I kind of, maybe it's,
So if I could maybe summarize, I think like there are certain sounds that have really strong resonances with certain things, like it's just going to be evocative of very certain things in pop culture. So I think the question is sort of getting at, like, is that something you like to play with? Is it something that you conscientiously avoid? How do those things come into play in the practice? Is that pretty good? Great.
Well, I can. That is a very important question because it's not only, I think, if you don't mind, I'm going to generalize it, not only to pop culture sounds, but all sounds that are used and that we are used to listen to. I mean, we can talk about pop culture songs, we can talk about Mozart, we can talk about Beethoven, we can talk about Renaissance music. I mean, this is all stuff that is part of our historical background, and we know them. So the question that you're asking is what we do with them. If that is part of our conscious or unconscious background, what are we going to do with those sounds? And I think, at least for me, the question, the answer has to do with what is the identity of the composer. And I'm not talking about style, it's not the same thing, it's the identity. So, for example, if you listen to Beethoven, he uses perfect cadences, 5-1, the same way that Mozart uses them, and the same way that Schumann or Brahms use them. So it's basically the same. It's a kind of a, you want to call it an archetype, if not a cliche. But however, we still identify something different in Beethoven that makes the use of that cadence something that is not Brahms, that it is not Mozart or Schumann. So that is part of the identity of the composer. So we can absorb all of those sounds from all these cultures, from pop, Renaissance, etc. The question then is, how do we apply them in our own music or our own work in a way that is unique? It's not the sound itself, but how we used it. And so if we're just reproducing a beat that already exists in some techno-type dance music, maybe that's not very interesting because it's just a repetition, it's just imitating something. However, if we find ways that to make them a little special, that somebody listens to them, wait a minute, that is a kind of techno-type sound, but it's not the usual techno-type sound. It's a techno-type sound that can only be done by this composer. Either, electroacoustic music composer or techno composer or whatever. But it leads to the identity of that composer. So I think that's where the answer is, yes, we can use them. Yes, we should use them if they're interesting for us. But what are we going to do with them?
That kind of also seems to maybe also lead to perhaps also the identity over time. And there's over the time of the work, but also over multiple works and sort of over the output of an artist over a longer period of time too.
And yeah, sorry, and of course that deals with the idea of history as history as we know it. So history as present, or history as past, and history as future. So that is a work of art resistant enough to endure 50 years of history. Will that work still be remembered in 50 years as a special work with a special identity, or it will be forgotten? So it projects into the future. And, if I may follow your comment.
other thoughts on this? Yes, Jim?
Yes, if I can more generalize it, it's a little bit like a signifier, or the culture that you're coming from, or the culture that you're mostly comfortable with. I think also in the university or artist community that we are all coming from different cultural backgrounds, and then we have those cultural signifiers that we're always really feel like, well, that's where I want to depart in my creative work. I think that is a wonderful thing to have, and then I think it's really not about where you start with in your composition, is where you can take that into. So it's the process of going away from it. It's the process of how you bring that into a new composition in an exciting and nuanced way. I think that's the thing that can be appreciated the most.
Thanks. Great. Well, maybe this is a good time to open up for another question. Yes, hold on.
Hi. I'm really intrigued by the discussion about composing with focus and creating moments of overwhelming sound or textures. And it reminds me of times where I've talked with other composers or musicians, and we hear a difference in like a level of coherence in a sound. I may hear something very coherent, and my friend may hear something completely incoherent. We're attracted to different things. Like I might be attracted to things that are inconsistent, or my friend might be attracted to things that are consistent. And I wanted to ask, how do you navigate those differences of perceptions of coherence in a sound or a piece of music?
Great question. Oh, Erin, we can't hear you suddenly. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, sorry, my child entered the room, so I'm interested in this, and I do it mostly with movement in performance. And I'm interested to hear some parallels with music, but there's something also that I think a lot about. People, we are a lot trained in observing Eurocentric values of expression in the body, so like the verticality of the body, perhaps more classical and ballet, or kind of like seeing movement happen with music. And in my work a lot, I'm interested in, as a Puerto Rican woman that do a lot of Puerto Rican traditional dance that comes from the African diaspora, to kind of like really dig in some of these other values of working with syncopation and the falling body, and the ideals of beauty are different, and the body is not on the vertical, and things are happening very different from each other simultaneously, as I was describing before. But it's because the value of the individuality, while there's something in common, is so much more important than kind of seeing everybody do the same thing, which may be easier to watch for an eye that has been trained to watch dancers do all the things at the same time, in time with the music, and never go off the music. So there's something about kind of insisting in providing a new sense, like a new order within the chaos, or a new sense of coherence, using the elements of the lights and the sound and the sound that is distorted or not, and the body in space and how they behave with each other. as a movement composer, I'm very interested in playing with that. And I feel there's ways in which you can take a piece of choreography or a piece of art and kind of guide the audience by the hand to get there, and not just kind of throw it at them straight away. And kind of little by little, they start to feel more and more comfortable within that new coherence that you're providing for them in the world that you create. But I love to see how other artists and composers, both music and choreographers, work with that.
Yeah, that also overlaps really importantly, I think, with something that you were talking about, Joe, with regard to like taking that thing and then making it different, right? Like finding that special thing. And oftentimes what is going to be special is actually something that is going to be unexpected, and therefore the piece itself has to give the tools to decode what that special thing is. And I think that really gets to an overlap of what the two of you mentioned with regard to that. G, did you have something? I saw a hand up. Yes, please.
A hand. So I think in music, just echoing what Marian just said, in music, the sound design process for electronic music, I think we have this practice that's called, when you're dealing with sound design, we probably will have a better opportunity or chance for our sound expression to be understood if we design our sound to be parametric support. So like developing your sound journey to be changing over time, but with multiple parameters changing together, so that you will be able to experience, like for example, in electronic music term, is that while you're changing the cutoff frequency, you're also changing the fundamental pitch of it, while at the same time that you're changing the granular synthesis grains simultaneously to be heard, so that you will be able to create this crescendo or intensity to be experienced more dramatically. So maybe that will have a better chance to be experienced in a more coherent way, just as one example.
Yeah, great point. So I'd love if we could do one more question. We have... Oh, great. Yes, please come on.
Yeah, so I was just interested in, like, we're talking about like dance and more graphic type visuals. And I was just wondering, for somebody maybe who like isn't necessarily as drawn to incorporating those things into music, if you had any advice for kind of enhancing that visual component of music when you don't have that additional stimuli to like kind of do that. Because I find that a lot of times with music it can be kind of difficult for people to just sit and listen for full duration of, especially like longer form work. So I was wondering if you had any advice for enhancing that for more just straightforward kind of pieces like that.
Thanks.
I could respond. I think in a way you're asking an impossible question, which is fine. Am I correct in thinking that you're saying like how can you fold visual into the sonic such that if you don't have visual, if you don't have visual in the sonic, it's still represented? Is that kind of what you're thinking? Yeah. The first thing that comes to mind is like playing with lighting in the context of acousmatic music, which can be really cool, and that could be static or it could change over time. And that can definitely be concurrent with the acousmatic sound, but not be a full visual stimuli, and also require you to not have to learn, software to make visuals or such. But yeah, I think the talk about source bonding really relates to this, in that if you want to make something that's cinema for the ear in a totally acousmatic context, a totally electronic context, there's a lot of things related to film theory and other various things related to film that you can take advantage of, because when you're thinking about the visual medium, you're thinking about the sonic medium. They're both trying to tell a story over time, and you can think about creating a film and sound and think about ways in which you can use source bonding or not, or refuting that to get a kind of visual narrative to come into the heads of the people listening. So it's impossible, but you can also achieve it, which is kind of cool too.
Yeah, Luke, I mean, you probably know the work of Luke Ferrari. Well, it's probably one of the composers that does that a lot. I mean, where you have really a narrative in the music that you actually almost can see the scenes that are happening while the music is going on.
All right. Well, I think that is a good point to stop because we are out of time. I just want to thank all of the panelists, including Mariam, who probably had another child invasion happening in the room. But we, oh, she's back. Great. Good.
I'm so sorry.
Not a problem at all. I just wanted you to be here to thank all of the panelists. We're out of time, and I just really appreciate you all being here to share your thoughts and expertise in artistry. It's been a really fascinating talk, so please join me in thanking our panelists today.